Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Hello, and thank you for tuning into the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik, and yes, this is my first episode since joining the GSMC Podcast Network family just a few days ago. And first, I just want to say I am very thankful and excited to join the team here and become one of the hosts for the baseball podcast. I will be bringing you guys new episodes every Monday and Thursday that will be available on all podcast platforms. So a little bit of background about myself just to get you guys a quick look behind the curtain. I graduated from Lehigh University in 2011, almost 10 years ago already. That's pretty crazy, but I both pitched and played the field at Lehigh. I got recruited as a pitcher out of high school. I just did that my freshman year. My first start was on the road against number 14th ranked Virginia. That was a lot of fun. A couple of guys on that team actually ended up playing in the major leagues or still in the major leagues. We'll actually reference one of those gentlemen in a later segment of today's episode. But after my freshman year, I realized I missed the hitting aspect of baseball, and I was really good at it, and it was the most fun I have while playing the sport. So I went to my coach, talked to him about getting an opportunity. He gave me a shot, ended up going well. I started my sophomore year hitting fourth, playing third base on the road against Southern Mississippi, who ended up going on to the College World Series that year and had Brian Dozier on that team, a all-star, still in the major leagues. Everybody out there knows Brian Dozier. Played against him in college. And my junior year, I was a all-conference first baseman, second team all-conference first baseman. And then my senior year, I flipped back over to third base when I was a second team All-American, all-regional player based on Rawlings. There were 8 regions, first and second team. I was second team in the Northeast. So I was one of 16 players recognized that year for their performance, and very proud of that. Second team All-American, All-Regional. So once again, looking forward to communicating with you guys here moving forward about all things Major League Baseball. Lehigh was close to my hometown. It is just outside of the Philadelphia metropolitan area, so a Philadelphia background. If you're hearing a little bit of an accent or a Northeast accent, depending on where you're listening to this, that's what you're hearing, just a little bit of Philadelphia coming out and coming at you guys. But let's get right into it for today's episode. Obviously, the story that everybody's talking about is the coronavirus and the effect that it is happening across all professional sports as well as Major League Baseball. And this is a story that's up to the minute changing, but based on where we are now, it was March 12th, the day the sports world stopped spinning. Essentially, it was Rudy Gobert of the Utah Jazz who was tested positive for the coronavirus. And the moment that happened, everybody up until that point had determined that they were going to play in empty stadiums but try to continue a status quo on the dates of games, the times, and everything like that. But once Rudy Gobert tested positive, that's when that first domino fell and everybody else followed suit, with Major League Soccer, the National Hockey League, the XFL, as well as Major League Baseball. March Madness across the NCAA, all of the postseason tournaments there were canceled, and specifically with baseball, they've discussed pushing back opening day at least 2 weeks, but everybody within the sport, everybody I've talked to, all the players I've communicated directly with, everybody knows that is a ridiculously ambitious statement. And word has it that within conversations with the agents, conversations with the players, if baseball were to happen before June 1st, people would take that as a good sign. And if you really think about it, and I guess I should say regular season baseball before June 1st, because that's one of the conversations that you have here is you cut off spring training, you cut off the time for everybody to ramp up and get ready. And then if this thing gets to a point where everyone is self-quarantined and players are not able to get out and train, whether in gyms or staying fit, because a lot of gyms are shutting down. Again, here outside of Philadelphia, our state governor basically closed down every school in the state for the next 2 weeks to kind of see what happens and go from there. He cut down also non-essential retail outlets, so grocery stores, gas stations, everything like that will stay open, but all schools, daycares, all of the above are closed now. So I will have a 2-year-old daughter at home with me over the next couple of weeks instead of her being at daycare with all of her friends. So it's just a complicated situation, because I was talking to a friend of mine, a current major league player, and he was discussing, yes, how it's been reported and everybody knows that they have been given the 3 options of, 1, stay in the spring training facility area, kind of continue on like they have been the last couple of weeks. And there's a number of teams that have done so. The New York Yankees have decided to stay down in the Tampa area because things up in New York City are continuing to get worse and worse when it comes to the virus, so they don't want to return there. The San Diego Padres, I believe it's also been reported, are staying in Arizona, not returning to San Diego because they're in a confined area, and they have the cleaning supplies and everything like that to be on top of it. Obviously, we saw Utah. They had an instance, and then all 58 players got tested right away. So they have the availability to get these types of resources if they're still together as a team. So that's why some teams are deciding to ultimately stay around their spring training facility. The second option everyone was given was to return to the city of which the team plays. So the Philadelphia Phillies could either stay in Clearwater, or they could come back to Philadelphia, or wherever your team's home city is, if that's where you have a house, if that's where you call home, because the third option is also returning home to where you grew up or where you currently live during the off season. A lot of times options 2 and 3 are the same options for these players. A lot of them live full-time in the cities to which they play, so it's basically, do they stay in Clearwater, or do they return back to Philadelphia or L.A. or anywhere across the country, determining which one will be safer for your family, because that's what this is all about. If this continues to grow and expand, and I'm no expert within the medical world, so I don't know, I'm just kind of looking at the numbers and seeing that I believe it's going to get worse before it gets better. Do they return home to be with their families? If their families are not in Florida or Arizona with them, do they travel back to be with them? And then also, are they driving? I don't know if you want to get on a plane right about now. I know I see on social media some people are taking advantage of low airplane fares, but that's a conversation, again, Major League Baseball is having. So a lot of players are split based on what I'm hearing. Again, the Yankees, they want to stay there. Other players are indeed heading home or back to the city that they live in, are heading back home because that's where they have all of their resources. They have food at home. They have the paper towels, toilet paper. It's not glamorous, but the things everybody out there knows are flying off the shelves. So it's an interesting time. Certainly in Major League Baseball. And then the follow-up question that the players are asking is, are they going to get paid as if the regular season is going on as normal? And this is another very complicated answer, because President Trump recently declared a national emergency, and there are clauses that the MLB commissioner, Rob Manfred, can use in every contract based on the fact if or when a national emergency does happen, a clause kicks in to where they can use these funds elsewhere because this is at the back end. And this is obviously a big question that they want answered. I mean the players, because like us trying to figure out, hey, if I can't work or if I can't go into my place of employment, am I going to get compensated? And then if they do come back in the month of June, is the payment going to be prorated just for those months, or will they indeed, retroactively make the months of May and April? And then will it just be on a game basis as well? And this is not only affecting the major leaguers, but this is probably an even bigger situation for minor league baseball players, because they make nowhere near the salary that major league baseball players make. And if you take away compensation that they thought was going to come in, a lot of them are going to have trouble making rent and paying the bills, because typically, again, the salary is not very large in the minors, and you'll have a few gentlemen living together in apartments, and if they're all not getting compensated, nobody's going to be able to pay for rent, utilities, or any of the above. So you've seen it on Twitter. Minor leaguers start to tweet out, hey, what's a good part-time job in order to make some cash, because they're not allowed at the facility, and if they don't get compensated like they would coming up here in a month, they don't know how they're going to pay for even the apartment they're probably in Florida. I know they have deals to where it says, hey, I'm getting paid in April, I'll retroactively give it to you once the year starts. I'm on the team, obviously, so this is a good deal, and things like that happen. So that's a big conversation, and obviously decisions are fluid hour to hour, but I have heard rumblings also within the players' world that a lot of them feel if they stick together and stay around the spring training facilities, it will make them look better in the media, make them look better to everybody, in order to say, hey, can you please continue to pay us, Mr. Billionaire, even though we're not able to put the product on the field because some of us are struggling, and even though you're not getting the income for this game, obviously we know you have some cash to spare for a couple guys' rent and things like that, while we're all trying to figure out what's going on here across the majors and the minors and when that start date's ultimately going to be. They keep saying 2 weeks, and then they're going to revisit. Obviously, within talking to agents, talking to players, the month of May is very optimistic, but it does look like June 1st is kind of that, hey, if everything goes well, it could be June 1st, but I don't know. We're in for a wild ride here over the next couple of days for sure. But that'll wrap it up for the first segment here of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik. Once again, very thankful and excited to be joining you guys and joining the GSMC Podcast Network team here moving forward. In segment 2, coming up after the break here, we're going to continue to talk about the effects of coronavirus on Major League Baseball. We're going to focus a little bit more on the field and some of the possibilities and reports that have been floated around about what some of the fallout may be, even if they do end up starting the year around June 1st or in the middle of summer. So hang around. We'll talk to you guys right after the break.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Hello and welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik, once again, and we are talking all things Major League Baseball. In the first segment, if you guys are just joining us, we obviously talked about the coronavirus and the effects that it's happening across scheduling of not only Major League Baseball, but all professional sports. But baseball specifically, they've kind of stated that in 2 weeks, they're going to kind of revisit to see where everybody's at. In the meantime, they've given all players and personnel 3 options of staying in the spring training facility, heading back to where you call home in the off season, or the third, heading back to the city of the team to which you are based out of. So a lot of people are deciding whether to stay in Arizona or Florida or head back home to be with their families. People are deciding to kind of wait out the weekend and see what happens due to travel, due to logistics. But some teams are staying, some people are going. Really, nobody is sure what exactly to do because nobody is sure exactly what's going on out here. It is crazy and certainly day to day. But the last thing we talked about is players getting paid as of a national emergency declared by President Trump. People are, the players aren't sure when that next paycheck's coming in, and it's affecting the minor league baseball players more than the Major League Baseball players. But in this segment, I wanted to discuss a little bit more about some on-the-field ramifications, try to be a little bit more positive in our outcome and assume that things start to go very well, have a positive outlook, and we, in fact, are going to have Major League Baseball this year. It is not going to be canceled, and we're going to start around June 1st, and basically 100 games is what we're looking at. Again, talking to players who have talked to their agents. If you're looking at June, July, August, September, 4 months, obviously some off days, so 100 games tops when it comes to that. And, my next thought is, okay, is the July 31st trade deadline going to remain at July 31st, or are they going to push it back to August 31st? Now, that's what used to be the secondary waiver trade deadline, so just make it the original trade deadline this year. Push that one to August 31st. But it also turns into a bit more of a sprint than it does a marathon when it comes to the Major League Baseball season. You won't have those first 2 months to determine who wins position battles. You won't have the first 2 months to find out who should be your 5th starter in the rotation. You're going to play meaningful games right from the start. And that's where, again, it kind of turns into a sprint more so than a marathon. And that led me to another question or thought was, does this change the outlook in free agency for some teams out there? Do they look to add somebody who is still floating around that hasn't signed with a team yet? Because, once again, after 2 months, they were going to judge whether or not the 5th starter was any good. And if he wasn't, then they were going to sign this free agent and bring them in. So is this now a time where guys like Jason Vargas get signed, or Andrew Kashner, I believe, is still a free agent, Aaron Sanchez, Clay Buchholz, starters like this who, once again, Ervin Santana comes to mind, who recently worked out for the Philadelphia Phillies. There's a good one for you guys. I know that's the hometown team, but Vince Velasquez, Nick Pivetta, Ranger Suarez all battling for that 5th starter spot. Meanwhile, Ervin Santana would be working out. If none of those guys got it done over 2 months, then you bring in Santana. Well, now after 2 months, you're already going to be over halfway through your season and past the trade deadline. Is Matt Harvey signed with anybody yet? That would be another good one to come in and give a shot. I know it's probably the least of teams' concerns at the moment. Obviously, everybody is concerned immediately about the health of all of their players, but once they get the okay to kind of go back into baseball operations and get back into spring training mode, because they're going to have to for at least a week get everybody back on the mound and seeing live pitching again. It's going to be 2 to 3 weeks if you're seeing live pitching. But at that point, is that when they bring in that style of starting pitcher? But outside of signing somebody or a free agent, the other thought process I had in my head was the teams that are currently dealing with injuries. This may ultimately be a positive thing for, or a positive spin on what ultimately obviously is a negative topic. Teams such as the New York Yankees, who are going to be without Aaron Judge, who are going to be without Giancarlo Stanton for opening day. Now both of those guys may be back and play a full season. quote unquote, for the New York Yankees, as well as Andrew McCutchen for the Philadelphia Phillies. Left field wasn't going to be ready for opening day, but by the month of May or June should be ready. So there are a few instances out there where this could help those teams. Now, it's not going to help Luis Severino with Tommy John surgery with the Yankees, but a lot of guys nicked up, banged up here from spring training, trying to get healthy. That's another way that this could help those squads moving forward. But let's say everything does go well and Major League Baseball decides to come back in the month of June. I think it's going to be in front of empty stadiums regardless. The more you read about the coronavirus, the more you're hearing how it stays in your system longer. You could still possibly be contagious up to a few months afterwards. Again, we're continuing to learn every day about what the deal is, but if they find it healthy enough to play, I still don't believe it's going to be healthy enough to have 40,000 people crammed at these games coming off of this virus. So when they do come back, I think it's going to be in front of empty stadiums anyway. And honestly, based on firsthand experience, when we were at Lehigh University, there is a tournament called the Liberty Bell Classic, which includes all of the Division I baseball teams in the greater Philadelphia region. I believe it's a 16-team tournament throughout a couple of weeks, and the finals is actually played at Citizens Bank Park. We were lucky enough 2 out of my 4 years to make the finals, so I've actually had the opportunity to be a starting pitcher at Citizens Bank Park, throwing against the University of Delaware. Didn't have the strongest outing that day, but still threw at Citizens Bank Park. And again, I bring this up because we were participating in front of just our parents and family and basically the people who are going to be allowed in the game if the major leaguers were playing. Those are the only people that wanted to come to our game. They're going to be the only people allowed at the major league game. But as a pitcher, when you're staring at the catcher and you're typically used to a backstop full of individuals, peoples, when you remove them and it's just chairs, it is very difficult and it is very different from a depth perspective. I felt like the mound was 100 feet away and not 60 feet away when I was throwing that day. You'd throw it, you'd look up at the scoreboard, it still read 86, 87, so you knew everything was solid, but it didn't feel 86, 87 coming out of your hand. And it was certainly adjustment, especially with breaking balls, where you start it, where your eye point is, what you're looking at, how it feels coming out of your hand, and all of the above. So that would be adjustment for these guys playing in front of no fans. And then they may even play in the spring training facilities, try to keep travel to a minimum and not have everybody flying all around the country once again with airports and just keeping everybody healthy. But I don't know, 100 games, that would be a very positive outlook and a best guess when it comes to right now. But you have the conversation about pay. You also have the conversation about service time. What about in-season incentives? If you have an incentive, if you make an extra how many $1 million, if you have 50 home runs, if you're Manny Machado in San Diego and you get an extra $1 million for hitting 50, well, that's over 162 games. So what's the math there when it breaks down to 100? I don't know, 2/3. Does he get it now for hitting 30 to 35 home runs that year? Does his service time, which ultimately goes towards a pension and how you get compensated, if you're arbitration eligible, do you get compensated for the full 365 days? Because they actually give you service time to the day in Major League Baseball. And fun fact for everybody out there, the New York Yankees and Yankee Stadium are the only stadium which posts your service time next to the name of the player yet to this day. A lot of people just put the name up on a board. This is where you go. This is how you do it. Yankee Stadium gives the service time. The only one across the board. So a nice little tidbit for everybody listening out there. So do you give them full credit for service time? What about the incentives? What about the pay? A ton of questions that need to be answered and won't be answered really until this coronavirus gets corralled as no longer just a health issue. Because once again, I'm talking baseball with you guys. That's what we do here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. So keeping it light towards baseball. But ultimately, up until this health epidemic, pandemic, I don't know the exact term that they're using right now, is more corralled, Baseball is going to be on the back burner. I'm going to keep you guys updated with everything that's going on. We're going to continue to give my perspective on when I think the start date's going to be. I'm continue to work sources within Major League Baseball to get you guys the most relevant and up-to-date information. But that'll wrap it up here for the second segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Hang around after a quick word from one of our sponsors. On the flip side, we're going to once again kind of keep it light here, transition into spring training. Man, just a few weeks ago, things were carrying on as normal. Everybody thought we would continue. There were people at games. There were people mic'd up. And that's what we're going to talk about here a little bit. All-Access ESPN, some of their behind-the-scenes moments, some of my thoughts on how Major League Baseball should implement that as soon as possible because it was excellent. So stick with us here. We'll have a word from one of our sponsors. I'll talk to you guys on the other side. Kevin Mahalik, GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Hello and welcome back, and thank you for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik, and we just finished up talking about the ramifications that are continuing to come out here based on the coronavirus and everything that is happening there. One thing we didn't talk about in the first two segments that I wanted to bring up quickly was international players are being very much affected by this. We discussed the three options. Well, one of their options would be to return home internationally, but the fear is if they were to do so, they would have trouble re-entering into the country. So they are very much being advised to either hang around the spring training facility or stay in the city where they are playing. And that can be difficult to do. Obviously, everybody wants to be home with their family when health is a number one concern. So a lot of players that have international roots are dealing with that emotionally and internally as well. But in this segment here, we're actually going to discuss some on-the-field baseball. We're going to talk about what was happening prior to March 12th and the shutdown of the MLB. And specifically, I wanted to talk to you guys about the ESPN All-Access behind the scenes where they had players mic'd up for a couple of different games, and they were able to have the commentators or broadcasters talk to them directly while they were participating in the game. And the first game that they had the mic involved was the Atlanta Braves and the Boston Red Sox. And they had Freddie Freeman mic'd up for the Atlanta Braves. And the moment I knew Freddie Freeman was mic'd up, I knew we were in for a nice afternoon, because behind the scenes story with Freddie Freeman, we touched on it in the opening about how I pitched against Virginia my freshman year. Well, Phil Gosselin was on that Virginia Cavalier team, and Phil actually went to high school with a teammate of mine, so I was able to meet Phil that weekend and talk with him a little bit. Well, Phil has gone on to have a pretty solid major league career, currently with the Philadelphia Phillies battling for a roster spot. But when Phil first came up It was with the Atlanta Braves as a second baseman, and Freddie Freeman at the time was obviously playing first. So Phil got his call up. He was in Queens. They were playing at the New York Mets, and they were out in the field for batting practice. And Phil goes over to Freddie. He says, "Hey, I'm going to introduce myself. Obviously, I'm here. That's Freddie Freeman. Let me talk to him." He says, "Hey, Freddie, I'm Phil. How's it going?" Freddie looks at him, turns, and says, "I'm the bleeping 4-hitter for the Atlanta Braves. How do you think I'm doing?" Turns back around and just lets Phil sit on that awkwardness for a few seconds, and then turns back over to him, starts laughing, and says, "I'm just kidding, man. Welcome to the show. I'm doing great. Just love giving rookies a hard time." And obviously at that moment I knew Freddie was a hilarious individual, and you heard this once again during the ESPN broadcast. First, they had him on during his at-bat, to which Chipper Jones, who would be joining the ESPN team, was communicating with him and an ex-teammate, and they were discussing pitch by pitch kind of what was happening. And one moment I took away and I wanted to discuss with you guys out there was there was a moment where a changeup was thrown down and into Freddie Freeman, and he took the pitch. It was a 2-1 changeup, and he said out loud, "Oh, changeup, they've been doing that more often in fastball counts." And yes, it's spring training. Yes, these at-bats may not matter, but to just get a behind-the-scenes look at a top hitter filing away information in the moment, to be able to bring that out later, just basically saying, "Hey, I'm going to keep a lookout for that if this continues during the regular season," knowing that this may be an off-season plan that teams have kind of started to implement due to film, due to off-season scouting, this, that, and the third. And then the 3-1 pitch, he communicates again, "Hey, it's spring training. It's got to be a fastball," right? He gets a fastball. He ends up getting a base hit into right field. And you can just hear live what he is thinking, what he's sitting on. Oh, something happens. Let me file that away for later, as he continues to get prepared for the regular season. And then a funny moment actually happened when he was on first base. The next guy hit a pop-up, and he was sprinting, even though there were 2 outs, because he kept saying, "There's wind up there. It's going to drop." And then ultimately it did drop, and he ended up scoring, pointing up to the broadcasters. Everybody was laughing. And it just showed the personality behind a guy who I think is given a little bit of a bad reputation. Again, here in Philadelphia, I have to dislike him because he's an Atlanta Brave, but I think he's a phenomenal baseball player and an excellent person. So I hate that I actually love Freddie Freeman, but he comes off, he obviously plays very hard. He doesn't smile or laugh a lot when he's on national television. So a few stories there and a behind-the-scenes curtain look obviously gave you guys a glimpse into his personality and allowing people to fall in love with the person and not just the player. Another game ESPN had all access to was the Mets versus the Cardinals, and they really focused in on Pete Alonso for obvious reasons, coming off a season where he hit over 50 home runs, an early MVP candidate for the National League. But if you're sensing a little bit of a pattern out there with who they're talking to, you're right, because first baseman Freddie Freeman, first baseman Pete Alonso, and then later first baseman Anthony Rizzo. Yes, first basemen tend to be a little bit more of the character on the team, kind of the class clown, so to speak. I myself, being a former first baseman, baseball can get a little slow. So when you get company there on first base on the other team, you tend to have conversations. You tend to talk to people, which means as you play against these guys for 3, 5, 7, 10 years, which Freeman has, Rizzo is getting there, and Alonso will, you start to have relationships with guys on other teams and communicate and become friends. So there's good audio. So it's no coincidence that ESPN is miking up these first basemen. And Pete Alonso gave you a glimpse behind the scenes with him as well. He was essentially announcing the game live as it was happening, almost mimicking the broadcasters. They were up there laughing, saying, "We don't even have to do anything anymore because you're taking it away here." But Pete Alonso, obviously being a star in the making for New York in one of the biggest metropolitan markets, he is a gentleman that I understand ESPN as well as the New York Mets need to be promoting moving forward in order to continue to grow Major League Baseball's popularity and continue to engage all fans out there. And then the last matchup I want to talk about with you guys was the Chicago Cubs and the LA Angels. And Anthony Rizzo and Chris Bryant were mic'd up at the same time, and hearing those two communicate during the at-bat. And once again, the portion of this All Access that I would pay money for, I would pay per game, whatever it costs to have access to this, is the audio while they are hitting. Chris Bryant swings at a first pitch fastball, hits it barely foul. He's running to first base. He's out of breath. On his way back to home plate, he says, "This is the first time I've swung at the first pitch this spring." Once again, filing away knowledge in the moment, knowing that, hey, I'm probably going to see a fastball because I haven't swung yet, so I need to show them I'm willing to swing in order to not just be 0-1 here because I take it every time. And then he sees sliders from then on out, pops it up, sprints it out to first base, acknowledges that he's setting a good example for the kids out there. And then Anthony Rizzo follows that up with an at-bat where he's talking about he eventually gets to 2-2 and discusses out loud before the pitch, "I'm sitting on a fastball here because I haven't seen one this at-bat. He's thrown me all off speed, and now I'm eventually back into a little bit of a hitter's count where he's not going to want to go 3-2 and eventually have to throw a fastball. So this is the second best option in this moment. You haven't seen it yet. Here comes the fastball. He gets it, ultimately gets a hit into right center. And once again, you're like, man, no wonder he was all over that. He was sitting right on it. This is what he was looking for. And it's almost a prediction or a preview of what may happen. The XFL is trying this, giving you audio into the coordinators calling the play in, so you know if a long pass or a deep pass is coming, you can kind of get excited prior to the play instead of in the moment. And that's where here, if you know they're sitting off speed, or if you know they're sitting on a fastball and you see it coming, you're anticipating positive things to occur. But the reaction amongst everybody, the players, the fans, the teams that were involved, obviously David Ross with the Chicago Cubs as the manager. He was previously employed by ESPN, so he was a big peacemaker between the two, knowing that ESPN wasn't going to completely uproot everything that was going on during the game. But the access that this gave us as fans, once again, I would pay money for. So this needs to be implemented immediately in the regular season. Once this season comes back, and I know this is completely going to be on the back burner now because of all the coronavirus and the health concerns that are coming, and even when they get back, who knows how many fans, if fans will be allowed. The last thing on their minds is going to be all access. But this needs to be implemented the moment everything gets back to normal, whether it's 2021 for every team, their regional announcers talk to the players when they're on the bench, not in the game. That way during the regular season, they're not upset if they make an error because they were talking to somebody in their ear and not completely focused. Only get them on the bench, play the audio from the at-bat live, but don't allow the broadcasters to come into the ear. Only play outbound audio. That's what we need in order to bring the best broadcast to the fans moving forward. But that wraps up this segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast. When we come back, the next segment, I'm actually going to talk about a few other changes that I think Major League Baseball should implement in order to continue to grow the sport's popularity and allow all fans to become more engaged, not only with the product on the field, but also some of the social media aspects and things that need to change on that side of things ASAP. So hang with us here. After a word from one of our sponsors, we'll come back. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. This is the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Hang with us.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup finals.
Listen now.
Welcome back, and thank you for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik. Once again, I am new to joining the GSMC Podcast Network. I am very excited and privileged to talk to you guys here, all things Major League Baseball, over the course of the next couple of years. I will be coming to you guys twice a week here moving forward every Monday and Thursday, where you can find all podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, all of the above. GSMC is on all social media networks as well. If you're listening to this and you haven't followed us yet on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, please take a moment to do so. It very much helps us spread the word, continue to grow the popularity of the baseball podcast, as well as the GSMC Podcast Network as a whole. Last segment, we talked to you guys about the ESPN All-Access behind the scenes that they gave us, the communication between the players while they were hitting. Freddie Freeman, Pete Alonso, Anthony Rizzo, Chris Bryant. A lot of great stories as well after they were taken out of the game on the bench, talking about the names they use on the road for hotels and reservations and things like that. So really did give us an excellent broadcast, and it pulled me in as a fan because I was learning more about these individual players and why I should be rooting for them if I'm not a fan of the team itself. Because I think one of the problems baseball runs into with popularity is the fantasy baseball aspect of baseball is much more difficult and much longer than fantasy football. Fantasy football is once a week. You play a guy. It's for a couple of hours. My wife loves doing it with her coworkers at work. Everybody can get involved. Fantasy baseball is much more difficult because you constantly have people being shuffled up and down from the minors to the majors, AAA to the bigs. You have prospects being called up halfway through the season, as well as you're playing week-long games, not just daily games. And it's difficult for even me as a baseball diehard to get very much entrenched in the fantasy world. But what fantasy football has done for the NFL is allowed people to root for individual players if they don't root for teams, such as Sunday Night Football between the Jaguars and Texans. I myself, again, Philadelphia market, I don't necessarily care who wins the football game, but I'm still going to watch because I have Deshaun Watson on my fantasy team. And fantasy baseball doesn't have the same effect. People on the East Coast are not staying up to watch Mike Trout play on the West Coast because they have him on their fantasy baseball team. They don't have that same draw or that same attraction. And that is part of the problem within the popularity of the sport. This All Access is a tremendous first step in bringing in that audience and allowing people to say, hey, I may not like the Braves, but Freddie Freeman is a really good dude. I'm going to watch the games and root for him because I want to hear what he has to say, and I'm very much entertained by him during the game, which I think may be a bit slow. So, excellent job by ESPN. But in this segment, I wanted to talk to you guys about a few additional changes that I believe should be made immediately with Major League Baseball. The first one has nothing to do with the product on the field, and it has to do with their media rules and media concept. Currently, Major League Baseball doesn't allow social media platforms to freely share Major League Baseball content. And one of the top Twitter accounts out there, if you're a baseball fan, I'm sure you've heard of it, but Pitching Ninja went into a legal battle with Major League Baseball where ultimately they came to an agreement. But the problem is, why is Major League Baseball going after an account that is only trying to share videos and information about how difficult it is to play your sport at the highest level? All Pitching Ninja does is use 1 to 2 pitches, kind of overlap them and show you fastball, curveball. Hey, it's amazing how these hitters are able to do what they do when in a blink of an eye, these pitches look the same and then all of a sudden go in 2 different directions. If a casual fan sees that and realizes, oh my gosh, that's very difficult to do, they're going to be more inclined to tune in to the baseball game that's on television that night just to watch it and say, wow, these guys are very talented. I actually do think this is entertaining now. And yes, MLB and Pitching Ninja have come to an agreement, but they still haven't allowed freedom of all usage. And the NBA did this a few years ago, and it's a reason, again, their popularity has exploded, because accounts such as Overtime Season or House of Highlights are able to cut up the best of the best and give that 1-minute glimpse on social media into, hey, look at what these athletes are doing for this product. Look at the NBA and the product that they're putting out there and how difficult and entertaining all of these aspects are. Baseball doesn't allow people like myself to do that. Doesn't allow people to share videos of Bryce Harper hitting a home run and having commentary around how difficult it is to do. And if you're able to do this, once again, common fans will be drawn to how great these guys are. And when I say these guys, that parlays into my next thought, which is within the social media world, all teams need to be pushing their top talent, not only as baseball players, but as people. Like I talked about in the All-Access, we got a behind-the-glimpse look at Freddie Freeman and realized, wow, this guy's a really good dude, somebody that I could see myself rooting for. And each team should have a pitcher or a player that they know is the face of their franchise. Everybody who's a fan of their team out there knows the one or two individuals who they're thinking of, and they need to partner with the social media of the team itself, of some of these local media companies, to show, once again, pregame routines. Basketball started to blow up once we all started to see Steph Curry's pregame routine. Steph Curry comes on and lights the world on fire, changes the game of basketball. Shortly thereafter, we get to see what he's doing before the game in order to prepare himself to perform like this. Imagine seeing the pregame routine of Max Scherzer. Yes, it doesn't have to be on national television, but again, get on social media, share this, because the amount of shares and natural reach and influence you can have on social media can compound so quickly and immediately that you will get more exposure this way, and you will draw in people who are not only fans of baseball, but people of excellent performers, people who are fans of individuals who are top performers at whatever they do. Like a common person sees Max Scherzer dominate night after night. I want to know what not only he's doing physically, but also what is he doing mentally in order to prepare for each opportunity and prepare for each start. We see the videos online about how he talks to himself and he's mouthing things, that can't be repeated on certain podcasts or radio shows. And is he doing this all the way prior to his start? How long before his start does he start to get in this style of mode? All baseball players of all ages would love to see this. And once again, all people who are just fans of humans performing at their best would love this behind-the-scenes routine. From a hitter's perspective, Mike Trout, he goes out and dominates. How is he preparing? How much time is he spending on scouting reports, scouting routines? Obviously, you don't have to give away that information, but talk to him behind the scenes. What's his daily routine like? How much time is he spending actually in the cage? Is he working from a tee? Is he working front toss? Is he watching video from past years? How long is he watching video? How much time does he actually put into the charts? Again, people who are trying to be professional baseball players would love to see it, as well as just everybody getting in that mentality of somebody who is very, very successful at what they do. But my third and final change that I have, and the first one that has to do with the product on the field, is one that I think you guys are going to like out there. After 11 innings, so instead of heading into the 12th inning, I am proposing a 3-swing home run derby style winner. Instead of having games going 17, 18 innings, 6 hours, taking sometimes into 3 a.m, 2 o'clock local time, wherever you may be, kids have school the next day, so obviously the ratings and everything are not going to be tremendous wherever you are, unless it's a postseason game, but this would be a regular season rule, of course. After the 11th inning, if you are still tied, 3-swing home run derby with your best hitter. Yes, you roll out the L screen. Yes, you get the BP pitcher out there. They get 3 swings. Just think about it. If it's the Dodgers and the Yankees, Who do you pick? Giancarlo Stanton or Aaron Judge? Do you flip-flop back and forth? Because you know it's going to happen multiple times throughout the year. People play more than 11 innings more than once, so do you switch back and forth? If you're the Dodgers, who is it? Jock Peterson, Mookie Betts, who you recently acquired? You got plenty of options. I would love to see Bryce Harper against Pete Alonso in a swing-off after 11 innings of baseball if we're still tied. It would be an NHL style of shootout. It would be a finale. That way, okay, I'll stay up for the end of this one. It's the 11th inning. I'll continue to watch because I want to see the home run derby ending. Not, I don't know when this game's going to end. I have work in the morning. I'm going to go to bed. So eliminate the 17, 18 inning baseball games. Give me a home run derby style of swing off. 3 swings. If you're tied, go one at a time until we have a winner. That person adds one more run. They don't get any more home runs on the year or anything like that, like goals in hockey. We'll figure out the stats later. But that's my idea on how to improve the extra innings and not putting somebody at second base like they do in softball or any of those style of rules that have been floated around. But that'll wrap it up for this segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik. Once again, I appreciate everyone listening out there. I am very excited to join the GSMC Podcast Network, where we will be talking MLB baseball Mondays and Thursdays. Anywhere you can find us on all your podcast platforms. Follow us on social media everywhere. Share us. Please, it goes a long way in helping spread the word. But we'll pause right now for a word from one of our sponsors. And on the next side, we'll be talking a little bit about the Houston Astros cheating scandal. No, I'm not going to give you the details on what happened. We're going to talk about some of the legs that will continue to grow based off of this conversation around the steroid sign stealing scandal, where I stand on that. It's a good conversation. You're going to want to stick around. So hang with us here. Here's a word from one of our sponsors. We'll talk to you guys in just a sec.
Are you looking to get your college football fixed? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? The GSMC College Football Podcast is your ticket to all things college football. Join us as we talk college football from the national championship, the college rivalries, the bowl game, to the Heisman Trophy. To which conference is the best? We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, the Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between. Download the GSMC College Football Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back, and thank you for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast here on the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik. Thanks again for joining us here, talking all things Major League Baseball. In this last segment, we were discussing ESPN All-Access behind the scenes, and then I followed that with a few different changes that I would implement with Major League Baseball, a few of them being allowing social media and accounts of all types to share footage and video of Major League Baseball and the product that they're putting on the field. Allow accounts like Pitching Ninja to multiply and duplicate, and House of Highlights and things like that work with Major League Baseball to grow and spread the word and continue to increase popularity amongst everyone who's on social media. It is not just for baseball fans only, but fans of sports in general who maybe aren't in love with baseball. Draw them in, give them a behind-the-scenes look into players, personalities, things like that, working with the top players to put them front and center with this social media push. And then on the field, eliminate the long games, the 5-6 hour games, 17, 18 innings. We're doing this by implementing a home run derby style of shootout after 11 innings. We're going to go to a 3-swing home run derby. It's going to be the likes of Mike Trout versus Christian Yelich in the swing-off, because once again, this is going to be for the win or the loss. So the top dogs are also going to participate if this were, in fact, to be the case. I think that would add fun for all fans out there. And again, it would allow you late at night to say, hey, I'm staying up for this because I know when it's going to end and not have to turn it off because you're going to work the next day. But in this segment, I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about my thoughts on the Astros sign-stealing scandal. Listen, we all know the details of what happened out there, the trash banging, all of the above. I'm not going to rehash the details of what happened. What I want to talk to you guys about is the conversation around which one is worse. Is sign-stealing worse, or is using steroids worse? And a lot of players are being asked this question. You can read out there a lot of different articles and reports. People have been given their opinion. And as I've come to learn, I believe I'm in the minority when I tell you guys that I think steroids is worse than what the Houston Astros did just a few years ago. And let me tell you the reason why I believe it is worse. And it has to do with a first-person perspective. Once again, if you're just joining us, a brief background of mine was my senior year. I was a second-team All-American, All-Regional performer at the Division I level. Yes, at a little school like Lehigh, I outperformed all the people at all the Division I schools in the Northeast, whether it's the ACC, Big Ten, Big East, you name it. I was named second team. So as one of 16 individuals that was named by Rawlings as a top performer that year, you would think I would get an opportunity to advance my career professionally. But when it came draft day and my number didn't get called, and I did see players and individuals get drafted who I knew had used steroids in the past. Now, I will say this didn't take place at Lehigh, but during my travels of Summer League Baseball, where just briefly I played in the Atlantic Collegiate Baseball League, which is in the northeastern states, Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey. I then played in the Hawaii Collegiate Baseball League on the island of Oahu, stayed at the dorms of the University of Hawaii, and played a great baseball out there for 7 weeks. And then I played in the Texas Collegiate League, which is a very respected summer league for college baseball players and has produced multiple major leaguers and a few NFL guys as well. But throughout the course of playing with all of these people, friends of friends, whoever it may be, you know of individuals and you get word of who is potentially using steroids. And when I saw their names show up on draft day, obviously I was a little bit upset. I felt as if this individual had taken this opportunity from me. And that's where, when it comes to what the Astros did in sign stealing, I don't think these players made it to the major leagues by utilizing this tactic. They weren't drafted because of it. They didn't advance through the minor leagues because of it. They were already in the major leagues when this happens. And now I understand some of you guys are probably thinking out there, yeah, but it did cost people jobs in the major leagues who may have participated against the Houston Astros. And yes, again, I would say at this point, just through my own experience, reaching the cusp of professional baseball, having that taken from you because of cheating, that is way worse than potentially not having an extended major league career. Now, you're probably arguing against me, and once again, that's where I say I found out I'm in the minority with what's happening here. But personally, that's where it affected me the most, and where I stand on the steroid sign-stealing debate, as well as my thought around steroids compared to sign-stealing is that sign-stealing is very much a team culture and organizational culture issue and not as much as an individual thought or action, because there are not teams or organizations that are pro steroid use and we're going to use this to our advantage. That is very much an individual decision that is being made. You know the consequences. You know what's going to happen if you get caught. You're making that decision. It is not pressure being put on you by others within the organization. Again, kind of talking to individuals and reading the report, it was very much this is how business is done here. So for the younger Astros that were involved in that team, it's very much a difficult situation to put them in because they haven't been accustomed to this once again throughout their minor league career. So once they reach the major leagues, when they're put in a room and talked to by other individuals on the team saying, this is how we do it here, you're either going to get on board or you're going to be an outcast. Now, I don't believe they were that direct with it, but obviously if you're trying to make your way and stick around in the major leagues, the last thing you want to do is have some of the veterans and people who are running this against you and not bringing you in as one of the guys. And this is why it got difficult to shut it down, because the culture in the organization as a whole was driving, and it wasn't just the individual who was behind the act of the cheating. Once again, I know I'm in the minority with that take, but it does have to do with a first-person perspective and the opportunity that I feel could have potentially been taken from me come draft day back in 2011 after I had come off a summer where I performed well in the Texas Collegiate League and then was second team All-American All-Region, to feel like I did not get an opportunity and some of these individuals did. Yeah, I'm not too keen on those decisions. But the last point I wanted to make before wrapping up this segment was just some of the Hall of Fame conversation that will come of this for players such as Jose Altuve or Alex Bregman or even Yordan Alvarez, who came up last year in 2019, wasn't on the team in 2017, but obviously we still have the gray area of the Twitter accounts, what's real, what's not with the buzzers, what exactly happened there. So there's forever going to be a cloud above these players. And I don't know if it's something that they're going to shake over the course of their career. I can only root for those individuals to continue to perform at the high levels that they had done so in the past. I'm rooting for Jose Altuve this year to hit over 350 again, maybe win another batting title. I'm rooting for Alex Bregman to have another 30, 40 home run season, 100 RBIs. Yordan Alvarez to continue a crazy pace. I don't think he's going to continue to the pace he was on in the second half of last year, but just have another solid season and be able to show that we got here once again based on the talent we had and not the information we were given. Yes, it maybe did help us win a World Series, but again, it didn't give us the opportunity and didn't make us the money that we had made having already arrived in the big leagues. But that wraps up this segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik. As always, I appreciate you guys listening out there. Do me a favor, head to social media. GSMC is on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. It really does help us grow the word here, as well as wherever you're listening to this podcast, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all of the different media outlets that GSMC is able to provide you guys with quality content on. If you could like the podcast, rate the podcast, review the podcast, that helps us continue to grow and spread the word even within those applications, those programs as well. So anything you can do out there to help us spread the word. Once again, I am your new host, Kevin Mahalik. I will be bringing you guys the GSMC Baseball Podcast every Monday and Thursday, talking about the latest that's going on all across baseball. In this episode so far, we've talked about it all. We've talked about the coronavirus, all the implications and outcomes that may or may not come from that, the ESPN All-Access that baseball needs to implement immediately, some of the changes I would make in order to improve the game, and then just now my opinion on the steroid sign-stealing scandal. And coming back after a word from one of our sponsors, here will be our last and final segment, and it's probably our most entertaining segment. I'll be talking about the most intriguing potential World Series matchups. If indeed MLB does have a season here in 2020, what the best potential World Series matchups would be. So hang around. If you guys want to hear that, we'll talk about that right after this word from our sponsor.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Hello, and thank you for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik. I appreciate you guys listening out there. We're talking all things Major League Baseball today. In this last segment, we are discussing my take, which once again is in the minority. I've come to find, after talking to players, talking to fans, that I do believe steroid use is worse than the sign stealing scandal that the Houston Astros did in 2017. And again, that's a first-person perspective, having an opportunity taken from myself. I think that is going to be ultimately what is the differentiator for me when making the decision on this topic. But in this segment, we're going to have a little bit of fun. This is the sixth and final segment of the baseball podcast, and this is where we get to have a good time. And in this episode, I wanted to talk to you guys about the most intriguing World Series matchups for 2020. Once again, this is if we have a baseball season this year, if everything goes well with the health concerns around the coronavirus and everything that is currently evolving day to day and almost hour to hour out there across the news, across the national landscape. So if we do have a World Series, these are my top 5 most intriguing matchups. Starting off, number 5, the Boston Red Sox versus the Los Angeles Dodgers. Everybody knows the blockbuster trade that went down the offseason between these two clubs. The Dodgers received Mookie Betts and David Price, as well as some cash to cover their salary. The Red Sox received Alex Verdugo, shortstop Jeter Downs, and catcher Connor Wong from the Dodgers. And wouldn't it be a heck of an offseason if, because the Red Sox over the past couple of years have made some not great decisions when it comes to contracts, and at the top of my mind, Nathan Eovaldi and Chris Sale are the first ones you have to think of. Because of this, they didn't have the money to sign Mookie Betts, so they had to move him in order to get return on investment, because that's what it's all about. If you're running a major league team, you can't allow a homegrown talent like Mookie Betts to just walk in free agency. You need to get something for him if you're not able to pay. So shipping him to the Dodgers, along with David Price, who has that postseason stigma along with him that he was finally able to overcome. So if they're both able to go out to LA, East Coast to West Coast, get that Dodgers team right back into the World Series, potentially get them over the hump on a Red Sox team, which is kind of rebuilding, it would be a heck of a story from both ends. And my next ranked matchup, the number 4th potential most intriguing matchup, is the LA Angels versus the Washington Nationals. Obviously, the Nationals would be returning to the World Series for a second straight year. Steven Strasburg would be going for back-to-back World Series MVPs. Max Scherzer back in the World Series. Patrick Corbin, Juan Soto would obviously have a fantastic year if this were to be the case. But the reason it is the Nationals and the Angels is obviously the offseason signing of Anthony Rendon for the LA Angels. Anthony Rendon going against his old team, which has lost Bryce Harper and Anthony Rendon in back-to-back off seasons and has only gone to the World Series in both of those years, as well as the Angels. This would mean that they finally advance in the postseason. Anthony Rendon would have a big year. Shohei Ohtani would have a big year. Mike Trout would finally get off the postseason schneid, because Mike Trout has only made the postseason once in his entire career, and this is another reason why the popularity of baseball and the popularity of Mike Trout are not where they need to be, because the likes of LeBron James play in the finals every year, and the best player in baseball has only made the postseason one time in 2014 and was swept in those 3 games. Not only was the team swept, but he actually only went 1 for 12. Yes, that one hit was a home run, but 1 for 12 hitting .083 in his postseason career. So for Mike Trout to carry the Angels to the World Series, obviously that means he is having postseason success. Anthony Rendon would be living up to the contract, and the Angels and Nationals would certainly be a fun matchup to watch and a lot of storylines to talk about for us in the media. My third most intriguing matchup has a little bit of local flavor to it here. Once again, Philadelphia is my hometown, so this matchup is the Phillies versus the New York Yankees. Again, a lot of these matchups, you'll find some commonality. A lot of them have to do with the big things that happened in the offseason. In Philadelphia, it was the Phillies moving on from Gabe Kapler, hiring Joe Girardi to be the manager. Joe Girardi taking a year off after managing the Yankees for 10 years. He was a 2009 World Series winner, and then obviously the legs to this story continue, because if the Astros did not do what they did in 2017, do the Yankees eventually win that series, win the World Series potentially against the Dodgers? Either way, just Joe Girardi return to the Yankees, and is he still currently their manager? And it's a fantastic storyline that needs to be talked about, but now he is with the Philadelphia Phillies. They also have signed Didi Gregorius to a 1-year deal, the Yankees shortstop who replaced Derek Jeter, now with the Phillies. And brief pause about Didi. Didi finally got his first hit of spring training right before they canceled game. He started his Phillies career, I believe it was 0 for 18 or something like that, and Joe Girardi stopped the game and went out and got the game ball to play a little bit of a joke on Didi Gregorius, and it was a nice light moment and just another instance to where Girardi, as a quote-unquote baseball guy, I believe will do great things for the Phillies this year. And if the Yankees end up in the World Series, obviously that means they had a healthy and quality year from Aaron Judge, a healthy and quality year from Giancarlo Stanton. They also signed the top free agent pitcher of the offseason, Garrett Cole, giving him the most money ever to a starting pitcher. That means he would have a heck of a year coming from Houston over to New York, and what would be a fascinating, again, storyline between the Yankees, all of their big names, big market in New York, rematch of 2009. Now Joe Girardi's on the red pinstripes and not the Yankee pinstripes. It would be fun to watch, and I think nationally would also be some great storylines as well. The second most intriguing matchup that I have written down here, this obviously comes in the wake, once again, of the Houston Astros sign-stealing scandal, but the Boston Red Sox and the New York Mets. Both of these teams lost their managers right before spring training. The Boston Red Sox, obviously Alex Cora, they moved on from him because of his time in Houston and what his role and responsibility was within the scandal, as well as the New York Mets. They had hired Carlos Beltran. Then they find out he may be one of the individuals who was really involved with what was going on down there, decide they need to move on. They hire Luis Rojas, who I actually know and played with an individual who played for Luis when he was managing in single-A baseball for the New York Mets. Behind the scenes, he says he's a fantastic guy, big baseball guy, big fundamentals person, a lot of PFPs pitchers fielding practice, a lot of cutoffs, a lot of things like that. So the New York Mets fans should be very happy with that hire, and he's going to do good things for the New York Mets this year. But if those teams were able to put it together after what they had gone through, a change in leadership, a change in the coaching staff right before the start of the Major League season, obviously the likes of Jacob deGrom and Syndergaard would shove for the New York Mets. And then for the Red Sox, Chris Sale would need to come back healthy. JD Martinez would have a huge year. But just the storyline about them bouncing back outside of what happened with the managers would be absolutely fascinating. And of course, the matchup that everybody would love to see is the LA Dodgers facing off once again with the Houston Astros. Everybody knows it's a rematch of 2017. Yes, they will be slightly different teams, so it won't 100% be a run-it-back style of rematch, but seeing the Dodgers and the Astros go at it once again, knowing now it took 7 games for the Astros to win, even with the advantage that they had. Now it would be 100% even playing field. Dodgers fans, I'm sure, would love to have the redemption tour and be able to win in 2020 and ultimately state that this is what would have happened and should go down as what happened in 2017. And then on the flip side, if you're a Houston Astros fan or a Houston Astros player, you're performing at an extremely high level, basically showing everybody, once again, what I talked about in the previous segment is that we didn't need the sign stealing ultimately to make it this far. We were good enough on our own. Yes, it gave us a little bit of an advantage, but we didn't win 110 games or whatever the exact number was in 2017 because of the sign stealing. We could only do it at home anyway. This is why we continued to perform on the road, continue to make it back to the World Series. They were there again last year, obviously losing in 7 games in a historical World Series where the road team won all 7 games. I still can't believe that happened last October. But the Astros versus the Dodgers, nationally, every writer, every media outlet, every single person would be discussing this is a rematch of 2017. Let's see what happens now that we're on an even playing field. Let's ultimately see what the outcome should have been back in 2017. But that wraps up this episode of the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Once again, I am your new host, Kevin Mahalik. Played baseball my entire life. Graduated from Lehigh University in 2011, where I was a second-team All-American, all-regional performer. Still have contacts who are in professional baseball. I'm able to get you guys some inside information, bring you quality content, discussing all things Major League Baseball. Once again, I want to thank Andrew Tate for the opportunity and communicating with him to work with the GSMC Podcast Network. But one last time, I am going to ask you guys that you please remember to subscribe to the show, write us a review, rate the podcast wherever you're listening, whether it's Apple, Spotify, all across the board, as well as follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. GSMC is on all of those platforms. The more interaction we have there, the more we know you guys are enjoying the show, and we can continue to bring quality content here. So thank you for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik. Thank you again, and have a great night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.